great to have you on this video. And as you know, we are translating the book, Invitation to Social Construction, and chapter 2 is about language and all kinds of very interesting things. But let us first introduce you. Could you tell the audience something about yourself? Who is Sheila McNamee?
I am a professor emeritus of communication at the University of New Hampshire in the United States. And I am co-founder and vice president of the Taos Institute. Those are the official titles. One thing I think I would like to say about myself is to explain that I am in the field of communication and not in the field of psychology. And I think that that's an important distinction, because I think what social construction is about is looking at human communication and the way in which we relate to one another. And so, this psychology is more focused on individuals and what's happening in their heads, allegedly. So I really feel like my discipline has positioned me well to be a constructionist.
So communication plays a very important role in social construction. But when we talk about social construction, then it's not always easy to explain other people what it is. So I ask all the people in this book, when they are talking about their experiences, what do you think is social construction?
It can be such a confusing term. And also, I think it's important to realize that many people use the term social construction in very different ways. So you might pick up an article or a book that alleges to be social construction, but it may not be what I talk about, or the things that are important. So the easy, as we say, elevator speech of what social construction is instead of presuming that we are self-contained individuals and that everything we do or say or think or desire emanates from inside of us, that instead who we are, what we value, what we believe, what we desire emerges through what we do with others and also how we connect with the various environments in which we participate. So it's not just human to human creating a world, but it's human to environment creating a world. For many people, social construction, but more important, it would probably be constructivism, is still a mental assumption that we construct in our private minds what things mean. But this relational constructionist approach that we are talking about really is privileges that how we come to understand the world depends on how we create meaning together. One of the phrases that we use is that meaning is always on its way, because you may say something, let's say we've had an argument and you come and say, I'm so sorry. And I say, yeah, you're always doing things like that. Well, you intended to apologize, but it didn't work. Why? Because you cannot force your meanings on me. It's the way in which I respond makes meaning of your action. So your attempted apology failed. So we're looking at this unfolding process, and instead of looking at you and what you do and say, or looking at me and what I do and say, we're looking at this unfolding process, which means that we both are contributing to whatever happens.
What do you mean by language and communication? It's not only the verbal language, I think you're talking about.
Yeah. So language, to me, is about all embodied activity. So it's not just words, spoken or written. It is about, and it's so much more than verbal and nonverbal. It's this kind of embodiment. So, for example, when I talk about language as kind of this embodied thing, imagine you're walking down a street and you see coming towards you someone who you care deeply about and you've not seen in a very, very long time. Just the way you move towards that person is so much more than nonverbal, verbal language. It's this, it's a way of being in that particular relation. You wouldn't move toward a stranger on that same street in the same way. Yeah. So when we talk about language, it's important to realize that there's so much more going on than just what people say or do. Yes, so the traditional view of language is that language represents reality, so that there's a direct connection between a word and an object. You know, if I say table or chair, it's indisputable. That's what it is, right? But to the constructionist, these are agreements that are born in relations and born in communities. So what we come to call something really varies culture by culture, historical period by historical period, relationship to relationship. You know, a silly example would be, some people call the evening meal supper, some people call it dinner, you know, that, and they are different indications of what that meal would be like. So we create meaning not to represent something, that there's nothing about this chair that requires that we call it a chair. We could call it anything we wanted to, as long as the community that we're part of is in agreement with that. Yes. Then we know, then we can make meaning together. And if I say, would you like to sit in a chair? You know what I'm talking about, right? Yes. But there's nothing in this
the chair piece on itself is nothing.
It doesn't call out and say, I'm a chair. You know? So, in the field of communication, the traditional old view of communication is that we transmit meaning. So I have a meaning, and when I speak or act, I'm just like zapping that meaning right to you. And when you don't understand me, it's because you're not smart enough, or you're incompetent, or, you know, there's something wrong with you, right? For the constructionist, we can't transmit meaning. We create meaning together in what we do together. And remember that doing is what we call language. And so when there is a misunderstanding, instead of saying, you're so stupid, you know, you don't understand what I'm saying, we say, how can I try this another way? Can I try to invite you into understanding this in a different way?
When we think about communication and language and using language to, let's say, change the world, what's your hope, or what's your thinking about this in these days? It's not an easy question, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is recognizing the diversity of language and communities. So instead of presuming, for example, that you speak English, I speak English, that you will understand everything I say, and that because we live in this moment in time, we should have the same values and beliefs. And if you don't have the same values and beliefs as I have, you're wrong and I'm right. That's, you know, that's typical, what's happening. That's what's happening. So instead, once we realize that there are different language and communities, because what things come to mean emerges through the negotiation of people in relation with each other, and in a place and in a time and in a culture. Once we realize that, then we expect difference. We expect complexity. The old view, the traditional view, expects consistency, stability, continuity, right, wrong, black, white. Here, so if I think in this moment in time, if more people understood the diversity of perspectives, then instead of judging who's right and who's wrong, you can enter in with curiosity. Like, I need to understand how you came to these beliefs. I need to understand, I would really love to know your story about from whom you have cultivated these values and these beliefs. And once I understand your story, I could still disagree with you. I may think war is evil, and you may think war is important and good. I can disagree with you. But if you've told me your story, I can't tell you your story is wrong. And so we're in a different place.
Yeah.
It's not, as you said before, it's not about agreement. It's about understanding, coming to some new form of understanding, which brings us into a different conversation. And by being in a different conversation or keeping the conversation going, we have the possibility to create new meaning and understanding together. I think, important is curiosity. And another important aspect is what we call self-reflexivity, which is having that inner dialogue that when you see the way the other responds to you, instead of saying, I'm right, this is the way it is, to have that inner dialogue. Is there another way I could do this? How might the other be understanding this that creates this gap between us? What can I do now? So instead of acting with certainty that we have the truth and just kind of, trying to transmit.
Use that as a check, right and wrong. So you're talking about reflexivity. So that brings me to a new question. That's I think great, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what's reflection and what's reflexivity.
Yes, excellent question.
And I think, well, you are the expert in this. So what's the difference between reflection, which we are used to, and this reflexivity?
Yeah. So reflection is just kind of pausing to think back on something that's happened. Like, oh yeah, that was a nice conversation, or, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. That made me look silly. That reflection is that. Self-reflexivity is questioning your own certainty about something. So how else could I do this? Is there another way? If my mother were here, how might she have done that? Would that help me? How are we engaging in this together? So really interrogating the unfolding interactive process while it's happening, where reflection takes place like after the fact, right? And it's not interrogating, it's just saying, oh, this is what happened, I didn't like that, or I like that. So there's a big difference between the two.
So could you say in simple words that reflexivity is a deeper way of looking at things?
Yeah, well, it certainly is. And I think a problem with our tradition is that there's no reflexivity. People act with certainty. I mean, let's connect the word reflexivity with certainty. So when you're being self-reflexive, you are questioning yourself. You're not certain. You're saying, maybe I could do this better. Maybe what I did invited the other into something that isn't working well for us. So that's the easiest way, I think, to think about it is, and that would be deeper, to question your own certainty about what you're contributing to the unfolding interaction.
Yes, and you're talking about self-reflection, so the word comes into my mind. Is there also something like relational reflexivity, something like this? Because
of course there is.
It almost otherwise would seem that I am reflexive. And I think you talk about a little bit more than just that I am the reflexive person.
Yeah. So colleague John Burnham from Birmingham, England, coined the term relational reflexivity, which means pausing, like we could pause right now and you could say, how's this conversation going? Am I asking you questions that you like to answer? Are there questions you prefer me to ask you? That's relational, bringing the other into the unfolding process and allowing them to kind of question it. Should we be doing something else?
So it's more a kind of collaboration than just that I am reflexive. And you are perhaps in your position reflexive. Perhaps we don't know really each other. By making it more relational, we can share our reflexive observations or things like that.
Exactly.
So great. So I think we are coming to the end of this interview.
Okay.
It was great talking with you.
Thank you. Thanks, Luke.
Yes, it was great. So I think the audience will like this. And,
I hope so.
And it helps us also to bring social construction more into life.
Great.